Okay, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, our fellow participants. Thank you so much for joining us. We are broadcasting from Nairobi, Kenya. And just as a reminder that this is the time for migration. That's why we thought for some of you would be here, but we can give you a taste of what it would be like were it not for COVID-19. So a big jumbo from Nairobi, slopes of Mount Kenya. We are so excited to be your host tonight and this evening. My name is Dr. Margaret Karembu. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the director of ISAAA AfriCenter. ISAAA is a non-profit charity organization that has a new mission to promote transparency and knowledge sharing on agricultural biosciences, enhancing trust in the food system, allowing safe and effective innovations to contribute to a sustainable future for both small and big enterprises. So this afternoon, this is the third of our series. The first series of webinars was hosted by ourselves, ISAAA AfriCenter. The second one was hosted by our Southeast Asia office in Manila, Philippines, and back again to Kenya. So this is a journey that we are making. We are very excited today to be joined by a very able team of panelists. I'll be introducing them a little later, but I'd also like to introduce the team of management from ISAAA. We have with us Dr. Maha, all the way from Malaysia. Maha, say hello.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, we also have Dr. Rodora. We call her Mama Ola, all the way from Los Baños. Hola, Mama, say hello.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Hi, Mama Margaret. That's new.
Okay, then, of course, at the technical backstopping, we also have the teams from both ISAAA AfriCenter and the Southeast Asia office. Right here with me, I have Bibiana Iraki. Bibiana, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
We also have Godfrey. Godfrey, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, Godfrey is our facilitator, so he'll be giving us a few tips on how we are going to participate fully. So ISAAA is organizing these webinars, one as part of our mandate of knowledge sharing on all aspects of modern biotechnology, but most importantly, the newer breeding tools and techniques, key among them genome editing. And we are really excited that this particular webinar has interested so many of you. We are so honored to be hosting you, and we are looking forward to your contributions, to your participation as you listen to our panelists tonight. Then we are also looking out to building partnerships with many of you who are here. And so as we continue with the webinar, please make sure you identify the areas that you'd like to join us in ISAAA so that we can move together. We believe that by getting genome editing well understood right at the beginning, we'll be following very much the footsteps of our wise who said that when you start early, the journey becomes short. We have seen what has happened in the field of GM technology, GMOs. The journey started right, but 22 years down the line, we have seen a very big discrepancy between the South and the North, where technology has been slow in adoption from the South, not so much from the North. And so this time, we seriously feel that we can all move together, North, South, public, private, so that nobody is left behind. And when we do that, we'll be able to move very far. Because again, as you know, if you want to move far, move together. But of course, for those who want to move fast, you move alone. For us in ISAAA, we have chosen to move together. And that is why we are so excited to be hosting you tonight. So before I introduce my panelists, I would like to call upon Godfrey to give us some rules of engagement. Godfrey?
Thank you so much, Margaret. And I'm excited and welcome everyone. So in order for us to have a smooth webinar, there are some house rules that we need to abide to. And first, it is important that all our participants know that this session is being recorded for future reference. And kindly ensure that you log into this meeting with your actual name and not your device name so that we know who we are engaging with. You will notice that your video and your mic are automatically muted, switched off during the presentations. And that is just to avoid background noise, so we can have a smooth meeting. So there will come a time when that will be enabled for participants to ask our questions. During the discussion session, you'll have two options to engage with our panelists. One, you can type your question in the Q&A section, and our panelists will be addressing these questions as we go along. So it is important that you mention your name, your country, and you specify which panelist this question is being addressed to. The other option of asking a question will be activated during the discussion session, whereby you'll be able to raise your hand. Will allow you to speak. So we'll be sampling people. We unmute your mic and ask you to ask a question to our panelists. So when that happens, use the same protocol, say your name, your country, ask your question, and specify which panelist this question is being addressed to. So make sure you join this webinar in a quiet place with stable internet so we can avoid going on and off. Thank you so much. Over to you, Margaret.
Okay, thank you very much, Godfrey. So tonight, this evening, and this morning, for some of us, we are very privileged to have three very able panelists. The first panelist is Nicolas Grantham. Nicolas is from right here in Africa. He is from South Africa. He is I don't want to say a daredevil, but I want to say that at 32 years old, Nick has been able to start up a company, and he's going to take us to that journey of how his company, which is a Kudu Biotech, which he directs, has been able to utilize the new tools of biotechnology. Nick is based in Durban, in South Africa. He is a holder of a biochemistry degree from Cantab, a Master's of Science, Molecular and Cell Biology from University of Cape Town, and also a bachelor's in molecular and cell biology from the same university with a distinction. Nick has very many accolades for his age. And we are very proud to have young Africans who are becoming role models and mentors of others. But one that I want to mention as a big distinction is that he's a grant winner of One Bio for innovation in biotechnology. He worked as a visitor in Banai Farming, Danziger Innovations, Hebrew University of Jerusalem for Ichi Cultivation Technologies in Tel Aviv. I'm sure he'll be able to tell us a little more on whether that inspired him to come back home and start the journey that he's going to share with us. Then our second panelist is going to be Nick Mao, Dr. Ning Mao. Ning. So we have Nick and Ning. Forgive my mother tongue dialect. So Ning, again, a very well experienced expert. Dr. Ning Mao is the manager of Singapore Consortium for Synthetic Biology. She works with an academic research consortium and industry partners within the consortium to promote synthetic biology research and technology translation in Singapore, of course, in Asia. She obtained her PhD in biomedical engineering from Boston University, where she developed genetically engineered lactic acid bacteria for gut infection, diagnosis, and prophylaxis. She also had 2 years of business consulting experience in the life science industry. So that is our second panelist, and she'll be the second to speak to us. Our third panelist is very well known to quite a number of us who have been journeying this journey with us in the genome editing webinars. We have Martin Lema from Argentina. We are very, very privileged to have Martin Lema, who is the former director of biotechnology at the National Ministry of Agriculture in Argentina. And he served in his own capacity as the Executive Secretary of the National Advisory Commission on Agricultural Biotechnology. Under his leadership, CONABIA was recognized as the Food and Agriculture Organization Reference Center on biosafety of genetically engineered organisms. He also led the development and application of pioneer criteria for the regulation of genome-edited organisms for agricultural use that are recognized worldwide. And so Martin has been journeying with us, and he has really shared freely his knowledge and his experience in the regulatory space for genome editing in Argentina and how this can be applied in the global space. So besides, he promoted the creation and chaired 2 additional policymaking bodies in Argentina. He has extensive experience in government scientific advice, science diplomacy, and policymaking in biotechnology. He's currently an adjunct professor at the National University of Quilmes, Argentina, where he was trained as a biotechnologist and performed postgraduate studies in the field of social studies of science and technology. So ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, as you can hear from our panelists, they have a wide disciplinary experience ranging from business to the technical and to the incubation process of doing business. This particular webinar is looking at starting early in thinking about not just how we do technology transfer, but also how we actually generate these technologies, apply these tools to our situation, and make sure that every citizen is able to appreciate what it is that technologies and science, technology innovation can do in their own daily lives. So that is why it is so important for us to think through how we bring technology from the lab to the market, and in between, how we build in that entrepreneurship spirit. Because it is only when we get to business that our other stakeholders start appreciating that there is something for them, they can make some business out of what they're doing. So before I call upon Nick, we are going to have our first poll question, so we get to know where we are and then move along and see how we proceed. So Godfrey, please put for us the first poll question. So I hope we can all see the first poll question. Do you think there's enough support from public and private sector to encourage entrepreneurship in genome editing? From your own situation and where you're coming from.
I continue voting. I'll close the vote in 10 seconds.
In 10 seconds, 7, 8.
All right, thank you so much for voting.
Okay, thank you very much. So now is the turn to have our first panelist, Nick Grantham. Please, you have the screen. So you have 10 minutes, and then we'll go on to the next panelist. You can unmute.
Right, can you see the notes on my screen, Margaret?
Yes.
Okay, there. So, hold on, it's not coming up with the notes on my side. This is a bit of a problem. Just give me 1 second. Sorry. It worked a moment ago. Okay, all right. So can you see, you can see the notes, or you can just see my screen?
We can see the notes.
All right, hold on. Now?
Yes, right. Good to go.
Right. My name is Nick Grantham. I hold a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and genetics, an honors and master's degree in molecular biology from the University of Cape Town, and a PhD from the University of Cambridge in biochemistry. I've been published in Nature Plant and the Plant Journal, and currently manage the innovation department at a multinational sugar company, as well as sit on the board of the South African Lychee Growers Association. My company, Biotech, is a startup plant breeding and variety development organization focused on using biotech to produce new cultivars of subtropical crops for the expanding market in KZN, South Africa. When genetic engineering first appeared in the mid-90s, the distinction between what is and what is not a GMO was clear. However, as time progressed, many technologies, both old and new, began to occupy the space between what is definitely a GMO and what is definitely not. Pictured here are the 3 regulations from South Africa that determine whether or not something is classified as a GMO, and a note from the US Department of Agriculture stating that subgenic or gene-edited mushrooms are not considered as GMOs in the USA, provided that no residual DNA is present. Residual DNA is present. It is still unclear whether South African legislation will follow the US and Argentine model or stick to the more conservative European model when it comes to genome editing. I've included here a guide which can be used to determine GMO or non-GMO status in my country in red and green, with the uncertain gene editing products highlighted in orange. Within each of these classes, there are further technical subdivisions. This is because things like transgenics and gene silencing are fundamentally different biological practices, but are regulated in the same way. Genetic modification is associated with a lot of legal compliance. In plants, the process is performed by the transformation of a bacterium called Agrobacterium tumefaciens, which is itself transformed with exogenous DNA and is therefore also considered as a GMO. Alternatively, transformation is performed by gene gun bombardment with naked DNA. The difference between these 2 transformation methods does not change the legal status of the final product, but because Agrobacterium is itself a GMO, there are differing levels of biosafety compliance to consider. And this influences the facility in which the work might be done. In South Africa, GMOs are regulated at the lion level rather than the event, which means to say that the progeny of GMO plants need to be reassessed for biosafety. Whereas in countries which regulate at the event level, the progeny of an approved or deregulated GMO do not need ever to be reassessed. An event is termed as the single once-off process of inserting foreign DNA into an organism. South Africa currently has 2.7 million hectares under GMO cultivation, placing it 9th in the world, just behind China, which has 2.8 million hectares. Gene editing, however, is mediated by the CRISPR RNA enzyme complex. This cuts DNA at a predetermined location, and an error-prone repair mechanism leads to the inactivation of the gene at that location. In this way, genes that give rise to problematic traits in crops can be removed from an organism. If this is only used to delete genes, and if no residual DNA remains in the host, which is now a real possibility, the resulting organisms are unlikely to be considered as, and therefore regulated as, GMOs proper. When sourcing finance for a startup biotech company, it's important to realize that even the best ideas are difficult to launch, and the entrepreneur needs a certain doggedness of just keeping at it. I've redacted the names here shown at the left, but each of these was a full application made to funding bodies that eventually went nowhere. A lot of the time, the fault rests with public organizations that might promise the world in funding but fail to deliver. But the fault can also lie with the entrepreneur failing to illustrate the value of their project. Innovation hubs are in principle a good way to launch these kinds of projects, but they are often staffed by people not perfectly familiar with the intricacies of biotech and maybe under-resourced. However, when it comes to GMO development, the private sector has a better track record at bringing these products to market than publicly funded organizations. This is probably because the timelines are fairly long with this kind of work, and because the reward is high, the private sector has to figure out how to get to payout as soon as possible. Whereas time pressure is less important to government because there is no incentive on an individual that a project be completed earlier. Biotech has 3 projects in progress at the moment. Money was gained through a venture capital company in exchange for shareholding, and through a tree crop farming company who wished to have exclusive access to a new variety of fruit with a long shelf life. Another big consideration is that when dealing with food, there are a lot of misconceptions. So many multinational firms would rather keep quiet about the kind of work that they are pursuing in the space. This is where we found a good fit for ourselves as a go-between the general public and publicly disclosed research interests and large multinational industry bodies that prefer to remain anonymous. Starting a biotech, one should choose their team members carefully. You may not need to have a background in biotech, but at some point, someone somewhere is going to have to do the laboratory work, and that person should be familiar with all the conventions of working in a lab. In the initial stages, people familiar with handling finances and business planning are very important. A good way to bring in these kind of people on board is to give away shareholding so that the team members have a vested interest in the project succeeding. Another important thing to consider is the legal standing of biotech work in your country. You should have access to a lawyer or to an organization that has a good understanding of the legal situation governing biotech work and is able to guide you on how you will earn a living from your development. We have been using a publicly funded body called Biosafety SA for this, and I can say that they do exemplary work and are an absolute pleasure to deal with. For a biotech startup, it's critically important to understand where you are and what you are doing. If there are adverse legislative policies in place, these will kill any project, no matter how well thought out and beneficial it may be. Conversely, you might have a facilitative legal environment, but you cannot solve problems for which there will be no customers. Royalties are earned on a per unit production basis, so biotech startups need to focus on 1, understanding what is legally permitted, 2, what crop species make financial sense to focus on, and 3, devising projects that actually have a reasonable probability of success in terms of biological technicalities. We could develop new cultivars that are higher yielding, pest and disease resistant, drought tolerance, have a longer shelf life, or are easier to farm or more appealing to consumers. But we can only do this if there is demand for such a product and the jurisdiction allows for it. A problem needs to be identified in a crop with a large enough footprint, and it must be both legally and technically easy enough to implement so that the project does not take decades until success is realized. No one will finance biotech work unless there is a clear reward payable at some point along. Golden rice might be a notable exception to this rule, but largely the point still stands. Business partners must be brought in who can provide access to these resources. The timeline to completion of a biotech project is long, even if pursued in non-hardwood species of crops. With trees, however, the slower growth and the time to fruition means that special considerations have to be made about how to go about developing and assessing the crops in a manner that allows for some income to be generated before the product is released to market. Securing development finance alone, however, is not enough. There also needs to be a mechanism through which to recoup the initially spent money. With agriculture, there are a number of models to follow, as plant breeders' rights have allowed for patenting of newly developed varieties for a period of up to 30 years. Vertical integration in some form is used for many different crops, including the Arctic apples, the BT brinjal, innate potatoes, and the Clemengold nadelpot. The principle essentially relies on royalties being paid to the developer, either at the nursery or harvest stage, but can be extended to provide some advantage as a growers club or a cooperative packhouse operating under a single brand. Indeed, many large agricultural corporates are happy to finance the initial stages of this kind of work in exchange for exclusive access to new genetics or a share in the royalties thereof. But this, of course, relies on the identification first of a suitable project, rather than the design of biotech work from scratch. No biotech project can exist in isolation, and nor is vertical integration alone enough to support biotech projects if they start fully in the cold. Rather, biotech should be fitted into an existing or expanding industry, and consideration with stakeholders like growers, industry bodies, and customers should continually be done during the development of the project. The tools needed to develop new crops might be outsourced to universities, such as we have done with the University of Stellenbosch Institute of Plant Biotechnology, but at some stage, capital expenditure needs to be laid down for infrastructure like nurseries and farms. If these can be established early, they can contribute to cash flow in the initial stages of the project by moonlighting with a secondary function before switching over to the core aspect of the project. The take-home message here is do not try to go it alone and do not try and rush things. Biotech is long and expensive work, and taking shortcuts leads nowhere, especially when it comes to agriculture. Take time to find out that the project is the solution to a problem and not being pursued because biotech is something that's quite interesting. The most important work is the first few steps in ensuring that the project is one that is worth pursuing and is likely to succeed. And once this is done, the structure of how to ride out the decade-long approval process needs to be heavily considered. I will end here with a very promising quote from a recent article in the Financial Times. Agricultural production is ripe for the kind of innovation that changed commerce in the 80s, communication in the 2000s, and social life the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that introduction and giving us your journey on what it has taken to build the platform that you have, Kudu Biotech. You have also given us some tips, and most importantly, you have mentioned that we should not just be getting into biotech for the sake of fun. We must be having an end in mind. What product do we have, and is it going to be acceptable to the market? Thank you so much. So our dear participants, please hold on, put on your questions in the Q&A. We are going to have that at the discussion stage. So our next presenter is Dr. Ning Mao from Singapore, who is going to talk to us about creating a nurturing ecosystem for bio-entrepreneurship. Ning, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Margaret. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome, and you can hear me clearly, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to join this webinar and to have this meaningful discussion with the other panelists as well as the audience. So my name is Ning, and I'm the manager of Singapore Consortium for Synthetic Biology. So the consortium is a government-funded body that helps to facilitate technology transfer and technology translation that serves the whole research community among Singapore, including public research institutes and the industry. So today I'm going to talk about creating a nurturing ecosystem for a bioentrepreneurship. So as a recap from previous webinars, we already have seen some applications of genome editing technologies in diverse sectors, including bioproduction, healthcare, food and agriculture, as well as energy and environmental applications. So it's also an exciting time that we are seeing the biotechnology startups coming out of not only the US, but also some of the emerging markets like Asia. Here, I'm just going to shortlist a few examples from each sector that I'm aware of in Asia. So apologies for the large number of other startups not mentioned here. So first of all, for bioproduction, we have Blufa from China and Spiber from Japan. Both companies utilize engineered microbial fermentation for high-value chemical and material production. Blufa produces a biodegradable polymer that can replace conventional plastics. And Spiber, as you could tell from its name, it produces spider silk proteins that can be processed into fashion materials and industry materials that have special mechanical properties. For healthcare, we have Tessa from Singapore and Legend Bio from China. Both companies engineer T cells for cancer and other disease therapeutics. For food and agriculture, 2 examples here, Shock Meats and Turtle Tree Labs. Both are from Singapore, and both companies similarly develops cell-based food products, whereas Shock Meats focus on seafood, and Turtle Tree Labs focus on breast milk production from mammalian cells. And lastly, we have Euglena from Japan, which is already a public company who produces biofuels from engineered microalgae. And these fuels have been processed into jet fuel and biodiesel, and they are already being supplemented to real applications. I also put a question mark here because we know conventionally energy and environmental applications sometimes are faces more challenge in technology translation into viable businesses. So here is also a question for the audience. If you are aware of any interesting examples in this sector, feel free to share in the chat box or in a Q&A box so that we can also learn from you as well. So we do see the emergence of new startups kind of concentrated in a few markets, for example, China, Japan, and Singapore from the examples. This is highly due to the availability of resources and essential elements that can kind of support the growth of biotechnology startups. And here, I try to list out a few elements that can comprise of a nurturing ecosystem for bioentrepreneurship. So first of all, you have the research capabilities, and then you have fundings to support the startups. You have incubators and accelerator programs where ideas are formulated. Also, you need to have a talent pool. In addition, regulatory and legal support are also important. And maybe towards the later section of a startup, you will need access to manufacturing and commercial capabilities. So some of these functions are best provided by the public sector, whereas some elements probably will also need private sector input, as emphasized by Nick previously. So overall, an effective private-public partnership can be very helpful in the process of catalyzing technology translation. So as an example, I'm trying to delineate the players of each element in Singapore that we are trying to build an effective ecosystem here. So at the core of this ecosystem are definitely the research institutes where new technologies are developed and talents are trained with expertise. So supporting functions from these research institutes can facilitate IP generation, and some of these IPs can be directly licensed to existing companies. In addition, there are also affiliated functions from these research institutes that take charge of the technology translation function. So here, future entrepreneurs can be trained, and some of their ideas can be successfully formulated into startups. And funding from government and private investors are also available to support the growth of the startups. Especially the private investors often can not only provide funding, but also helpful business coaching experience, and also a meaningful network that can be available to the young startup team. So here, another question mark came up. So even in Singapore, we also still have some capabilities that's pending, that's still waiting to be filled up. So for example, here, currently most of the incubator and accelerator programs are affiliated with research institutes. But in an ideal case, we probably will also need open access lab space on a pay-per-use basis that can be available for external startup groups that can utilize this space to develop their first products prototype. So looking at the bigger picture, established large corporates can also be helpful in this ecosystem. Sometimes they provide a pilot facility for initial scale-up studies that startups can utilize, or in a later phase, they can provide access to new markets if a partnership is established. I think that's also the example that they gave in his presentation. Last but not least, an open and willing to facilitate regulatory body makes sure new technologies are introduced to the market and being accepted with proper safety guarantee. So here overall, even this ecosystem in Singapore is a very young one, and we are still experimenting with the models. And we do wish we can establish an ecosystem that can support strong and sustainable development of startups in Asia. So just now we've looked at the big picture of comprehensive ecosystem. Now from an entrepreneur's perspective, where whether your startup deserves funding is very often evaluated from these few aspects. The first one is how robust is your technology and product, what problems you're solving. And secondly, how big is the market you're targeting, and how effective is your business model to capture this market. And probably most importantly, how is this team, and do you have the necessary expertise to develop your business? And lastly, what are some essential resources you have to achieve your business goal? So in the emerging markets like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, we do recognize some of the opportunities and challenges for bio-entrepreneurs. We try to analyze this from each of the elements necessary for bio-entrepreneurs. So for example, we do see emerging research centers being established in these regions, which have the capabilities to conduct advanced genome editing researches. At the same time, it's a challenge that most of the research institutes still lack the technology translation mechanisms. Excuse me. And secondly, from the market perspective, we do see good market potential in these large markets with huge populations, especially in the agri-tech space. However, how you formulate the idea into your business model and how you overcome some of the uncertainties in this market are very important. For example, the regulation aspects. Thirdly, now we do see a growing talent pool developed in these markets. Also, with the increasing availability of online education resources, we can train our local talent on entrepreneurship. However, we do need to establish effective networks that can connect people with different skill sets. Lastly, on resources, there are incentives for local governments to encourage entrepreneurship and attract private investments, especially from overseas. But at the same time, we do need to build some of the essential infrastructure, for example, incubator space. So, however, these challenges should not prevent you from pursuing your own startup dream. So some of the elements in the ecosystem, for example, investors, do not have to be local. So we do see a large number of investors from China, for example, are actively reaching out to emerging markets where competitions can be less fierce as within China. Secondly, infrastructure probably won't become a difficult issue because we do see research institutes opening up to entrepreneurs. For example, I just learned from Margaret that the Institute of Livestock Research in Nairobi are actually opening up their lab space for as a pay-per-use basis that people can just go perform DNA sequencing and go work on their own projects. So these are promising aspects that we're seeing, which can help entrepreneurs a lot. And most importantly, I think creating the ecosystem itself can actually be an opportunity. So we do hear that the top traits of an entrepreneur is creativity and problem solving. So maybe if you see an opportunity in your local community, you could, for example, spearhead the establishment of the first technology translation center in your community, or pursue the IP expertise, or even creating a community or a media source that helps to bring people together. So these are actually great opportunities for young people to pursue an entrepreneurship in this topic itself. Definitely there is no one-size-fits-all solution for startups. It's an everyday job to overcome obstacles and take off against the wind. So that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mingmia Mao, for that very elaborate presentation about how to nurture, or some of the ingredients in nurturing a bioentrepreneurship space and environment. Definitely have learned a lot, especially on the kind of talent that we are seeing. Very many young people, if the ICT sector is anything to go by, that can drive the biology space, and we are going to see more and more of this. And with these opportunities and platforms that provide the South-South collaboration, as well as the North coming together to provide that investment space, then it's going to be so much better for genome editing. I feel so encouraged that this is something that can already be translated into our local situation. And in our universities, we have so many of these graduates that are coming up with biotechnology, biochemistry, and then engineering degrees. But the kind of, the entrepreneurship spirit and the skill set are the ones that we need to develop. And then, of course, the fact that we need to consider other disciplines, the market, the socioeconomics, and other ethical issues that you consider when bringing in these platforms together. So thank you so much, Ming. I'm sure our participants, you are still putting up questions. We are noting them, and we'll be discussing them in a short while. So now I want to invite Martin Lema, all the way now from Argentina. So we move from Africa to Asia to Argentina, just to get to know what is going on there. We have had a lot of good things happening in terms of taking leadership in the regulatory as well as development of entrepreneurship. So Martin, take the screen.
Thank you, Margaret. Well, hello everyone. Let me tell you a little bit about how can be the impact of different public policies in regards to creating a friendly innovation ecosystem for genome editing. Well, first of all, it is quite clear by now that genome editing can make a very important contribution to bioeconomy worldwide. It's not just a qualitative idea, but it's also something that has been estimated, as we can see. There are several estimates about this. And because of that, several countries have begun developing public policies in order to foster the adoption or the development of products derived from genome editing. In different parts of the world, we can see that the leaders of those countries are generating funds and making other provisions so genome editing can be fully developed as an industry or as a transversal industry in their latitudes. Moreover, these countries have identified that it's not just a matter of throwing money at the issue. There is also a need for creating an environment, a global environment when there is a freedom to operate, or at least the rules of operations are the same. And therefore, some countries have presented to the WTO their opinion about the need of having harmonized and science-based regulations that will allow the free exchange of these products after they are assessed correctly from a regulatory perspective. This particular statement that was presented a couple of years ago in WTO is very interesting. It says more than I show here. So I invite you to go to the WTO website with this code and check it out. It was not the only statement presented to the World Trade Organization. Also, the ministers of agriculture from my region, the southern cone of Latin America, presented a statement where they say that they perceive genome editing as having a very important role in issues like addressing challenges arising from the need to increase agricultural production in a sustainable manner, which in addition of being very important for sustainable production, it is also very important for food safety worldwide, since our region is providing food for the whole world, and also for the economy of our countries. This declaration is also available in WTO using this code. Here we have another token of interest from governments worldwide on genome editing. This was a statement or a communication from the meeting of the agricultural chief scientists from the G20 countries. I mean, the G20s have an agricultural group composed of the most important scientist leaders in agriculture. And they made a statement a couple of years ago where they recognized the issues where the G20 countries must cooperate in regards to agriculture. And among other issues like climate change or soil management, you can see there that genome editing is also recognized. In order to see the whole picture, the industry and the entrepreneurs in this area should follow the developments in the Convention of Biological Diversity and the Cartagena Protocol. Nick also mentioned this in his presentation. In here, there is currently a discussion going on about how to regulate the products from genome editing, and whatever the outcome of this discussion will be very important in regards to the costs of developing these products and the freedom to operate worldwide. Let me tell you now a little bit about Argentina. In our country, we have been adopting different kinds of agricultural biotechnologies for a while now. Here in the screen, there is a comparison between the adoption of another kind of agricultural biotechnology, which is genetically modified organisms, that began more than 20 years ago in my country. And you can see the rate of adoption or the rate of release of new kinds of genetically modified organisms with blue color. But then 4 years ago, there was the companies began bringing products developed by genome editing to the regulatory office, and the number of those products has been increasing with a rate shown in red. And you can see that the innovation rate of this new other agricultural biotechnology is quite different. It's more, the speed is higher compared to the other agricultural biotechnology of GMO. So the innovation rate is higher. Another important difference when comparing these new products from genome editing with those of the technology of transgenesis or genetically modified organisms is the profile of the developers. You can see here a comparison in regards to genetically modified organisms. Over more than 2 decades, most of the developers bringing products to the market were foreign, I mean from the perspective of Argentina, foreign multinational companies, and a little bit of local companies or foreign small enterprises. But now, in regards to products improved with genome editing, we see a very different situation. In here, the leadership is with local companies, I mean Argentine biotech companies, and also Argentine public research. So most of the products that are being developed and brought to the regulatory offices for their commercial release in the future, most of them are developed nationally by national actors. And the second actor in importance are foreign companies, but not multinational companies, just small and medium enterprises. But this doesn't mean that multinationals are not interested in this technology. They have a little bit of the share too. So what we have seen in Argentina with these 4 years of experience in regulating the technology is that an adequate regulation attracts the investment in research and development. Here I'm going to show very briefly different examples. Here is one example from our National Institute of Agricultural Technology. Another example in this case is a startup company that was created just to develop new crops improved by genome editing. In this case, we have a very important Argentine seed company, a small multinational operating in different countries, selling seeds in our continent as well as in Africa. And in this company used to have agricultural biotechnology understood as genetically modified breed varieties, only licensed from foreign companies. But now that the genome editing option is available, they have prepared their own lab and they are developing their own crops improved by genome editing. In here, an example again from our National Institute of Agricultural Biotechnology, where we can see that genome editing is not only applied to crops, but also in the improvement of animals. And here we have another example in this case, again on animals, but in this case it's different in the sense that it's a development from a local private company. This company used to exist before. The only thing is they were active on just animal reproduction techniques, reproduction assisted techniques, and they have included now the possibility of doing genome editing, or they are exploring the possibility of doing genome editing. So as in the whole, when we say these entrepreneurships altogether, and we try to extract lessons about what they need to start, or what was the kickoff for this explosion of genome edited products developed in Argentina, we can divide them in different dimensions. For instance, in regards to the regulatory environment, having a regulatory environment like the one we have in Argentina, which is science-based, it provides a response in due time, and it is balanced. And we have different kinds of entrepreneurs. If it's a startup, like a small company created just for this, for developing a few of these products, it was decisive to have this kind of environment. If we didn't have this regulatory environment, that startup probably wouldn't even exist. Then, if we consider a spin-off development, like in the case that the company, there was an Argentine company that already existed, and then they decided to explore genome editing as a way of developing new products, it was very important to have this regulatory environment. And then, in regards to public research, also having an adequate regulatory environment was important for them to explore having capacity in developing these products. Then, if we go to the next, after having a regulatory, after considering the regulatory environment, the next issue to address will be the equipment, the availability of equipment, because this technology may be not so expensive to implement, but you do need expensive equipment for some instances. But you don't necessarily have to own the equipment. So in the case of the startup, they can access the equipment through business incubators like universities or research institutions in Argentina that, in addition to research, also provide business incubator services, so they can access the equipment just rent them for a while or have a time-limited access to them. In the case of spin-off, usually these companies have the resources, they already have the equipment or they can buy the equipment. And in regards to public research, among the institute resources, they have the equipment that is needed. So if the regulatory environment is adequate and the equipment is available, next there is the issue of the knowledge of business opportunity. And in here, I'm separating knowledge of how to do, or the molecular biology knowledge on how to implement genome editing, compared to the knowledge on how to find a business opportunity, which trait, which genetic intervention, which product will be useful for the market, will have a commercial future later. Many times this is not a knowledge that the molecular biologists or the entrepreneurs have. They need to associate with somebody else that is perhaps doesn't know much about molecular biology, but they know a lot about the field where the product will be released. So for a startup, this knowledge of business opportunities is very decisive, because these are small companies, usually based on a single product, and in a manner of speak, they have only one shot. So they must do a very good product for the beginning. Then when you have a spin-off developments from a medium enterprise, they have more room for trial and error, and therefore having a knowledge of what is exactly a good trait or a good genetic intervention that will lead to a commercial product is desirable for a proof of concept. But in some cases, they can have a proof of concept where the modification is functional, and then move to develop a second product that has more commercial future. And in regards to public research, also it's desirable that when they start doing this kind of interventions, the trait, the product that they develop is commercially viable, but it's not essential from the beginning. Actually, in some cases, since they are doing research, the objective will be to just publish a paper. And then they can decide if later they, after acquiring the capacity, they move on to having a product. And so finally, the last dimension will be funding. So if the regulatory environment is okay, you can access the equipment and you have knowledge of business opportunities, or you have a friend or an acquaintance that can help you with knowledge of business opportunity. Next thing is to raise funding. In the Argentine cases, this fundraising has been of not so much amount of money, hasn't been compared to other biotechnologies like vaccines or genetically modified organisms. They needed much less money. And in the case of startups, they raised the money from angel investors. And you can see the word regulatory there, because it was very important for the startup enterprises in Argentina to have an early response from the regulators saying how they were going to regulate the product, because that was decisive to know how much time the regulatory phase will take, how much money will be needed, and having certainty about that helped them to attract angel investors. But after they began operating and they raised the initial money, they move on to joint ventures with similar companies from Argentina or from abroad. I mean, other companies also working on genome editing, but of about the same size. And with these joint ventures, they are multiplying their capabilities without raising further funding from angel investors. In the case of spin-off developments, funding comes from the company resources initially for the first trial, the first proof of concept. And when the proof of concept is working, also they resort to joint ventures with similar companies. And in the case of public research, the funding comes from the institute resources, I mean, for things like salaries, and the specific expenditures usually comes from research grants that the institute can get from the Ministry of Science, and all of that to develop a proof of concept or a first product. And likely when that product is available, it will be licensed, because that is usually the model in Argentina for a public research institution. So with this, I'm about to finish. The main important ideas that I intended to convey is that many governments have recognized that genome editing can contribute with socioeconomic and other benefits that are esteemed by their societies, and therefore they are supporting the development of genome editing. In order to have an innovation ecosystem that is friendly with genome editing, an adequate working regulation is as important as economic incentives, or even more, perhaps, because as we have seen in the case of Argentina, the investment comes, it's not so high, and it comes from private sector in an important share. So it wasn't so much about the government throwing money at it, but it was about having an adequate regulation. Perhaps other countries with bigger pockets can also add an important economic incentive. But it's not only important that governments work on their own regulations and perhaps on the funding. They also need to speak with other governments in order to have a harmonized approach for this and create freedom of operation, freedom to operate not only within the country, but in the exchange of products with other countries. Then, since we already have signs and tokens from the governments that they are working towards harmonizing regulation and promoting this new technology, this should be taken as an encouraging factor for entrepreneurs. Should take this as an encouraging factor, and they should not only be glad about this, but they should be active in reaching out their policymakers and provide positive feedback, or in cases where they are not doing this in the same way, ask their policymakers to address the genome editing with adequate policies and support them when they do. Finally, since we are having the situation I described in Argentina, it's also happening in other countries, like South Africa, for instance, as we can see, and in Asian countries and some other Latin American countries, there is an opportunity now for South-South exchanges to foster an innovation ecosystem for genome editing. These exchanges can cover many things. On one side, of course, the regulation, but also what other tools governments and private sector is developing for increasing the friendliness of their innovation ecosystems for these new technologies and products. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for giving us such a big dose of what Argentina is doing. It's really exciting that the comparison has already been done within a very short time between how many companies have been able to grow locally compared to how many companies operated for more than a decade when the GM technology was introduced in Argentina. I think these are very many lessons we are learning, and as we continue thinking about the kind of partnerships that we require if we have to get genome editing moving faster than how the GM technology was perceived, then it's going to require us to move together, get these collaborations right, get these tips right, and I hope some of the countries that are already ahead are going to provide the mentorship that will be required. We have received overwhelming requests on how to start businesses, which is good, because then we can learn from our panelists on how exactly you start a business. But before we go to the hands that are already up, I wanted us to now get into the main questions, the technical questions. First, really thanking all our panelists for giving us such crispy messages about what you're doing, starting from Nick giving us his story and how he has started. And I already have a question for you, Nick. Somebody has asked this question, how do you get from a scientist to becoming a business person? Is it possible for you to become a business person when you're a scientist? That's a very key question, just food for thought. But again, Ning, there are a number of questions for you and also Martin. But let me read out the main technical questions that have come up. Then we can see who will respond to that. So number one is, how much can we reduce the off-target effects of genome editing? I would like Martin to answer that. And secondly, the second question you can combine is, can the phenotypic effects of genome editing be accurately predicted? The third question is about CRISPR. Is CRISPR working well in mutation of organisms? Does it work well in mutation of organisms? And then, is this genome editing transgenic free? Is it a GMO or not a GMO? I know we already tackled that in our previous webinar, so maybe that one we can refer. And then to Nick, are mutated varieties legislated as conventional or GMO crops in South Africa? And what do you do about jumping genes? And could they transform into genome editing? So Martin, you can go first, and then we can go to Ning and Nick.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. In regards to the off-target, I think we also have covered that in the previous seminar. For those interested to see it, the issue of off-target cannot be solved with a single case. We have many people working on different genome editing technologies. They are improving the technologies day by day. So they report different ranges of off-target effects. In some cases, they report many off-target. I mean, off-target, as you know, is when you try to make a genome edition on a certain place of the genome, and then you have editions in other locations of the genome that resemble the sequence of your target. So since they have a similar sequence to your target, the gene editing tool may in some cases also affect those other targets if they have a similar sequence. As I was saying, different technologies are showing different rates of off-target effects. Some of them shows significant number, some others do not. It depends a lot on the technique, it depends a lot on the genome that you are modifying, and it depends a lot on how it is implemented case by case. So you don't have a single answer regarding if there are few or known or a lot of target effects. It's case by case. Also, and of course it would be improving over time as the technology the techniques are getting improved. But also, it's not the same if you consider plants, animals, or humans. Because, for instance, in the case of plants, you can make an intervention with genome editing, try to minimize off-targets as much as possible. But then you can take many plants that were a product of that intervention and make a full genome analysis and just select those where there were no genome no off-target genome editing, and only keep the ones that didn't have any off-target, and discard the one that had 1, 2, or 3 off-target interventions. You can do the same thing with humans or animals, and therefore it's not the same thing in plants, humans, and animals, and the freedom to use one or the other technique is different. It has to be assessed case by case.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Martin. I'm conscious of the time, and since this was really an entrepreneurial class or session, we want to concentrate on a number of questions that have come up about business startups. So Ning, I'll let you skip the technical question because we are going to post all those in our online platforms. Get Nick to answer the one question, and then for Ning, you can be preparing for these two. Please, do you provide funding to startups in Africa? And then somebody here wants to know, if you want to start up a business in biotechnology and it requires so much investment, how can they get funding. So maybe you can respond to that. You can prepare that as Nick responds to the question about how genome edited products are considered in South Africa.
So our parliament is currently trying to decide whether or not genetically edited organisms fall under the Genetically Modified Organisms Act 1997. It's not yet clear that they will, although I have it on authority that it's likely that South Africa will be following the Argentine and American model where genome editing is unregulated, but we don't know that yet. It still has to be an act passed through Parliament. So at the moment, we don't know. We suspect it's probably going to be regulated on a case-by-case basis. But again, there's no information. You did touch on mutation breeding as well, which is functionally indistinguishable from genome editing, and that's fully unregulated in South Africa as it is everywhere else in the world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. Ning?
Yes, so for the funding problem, as I try to answer it in the chat, I think it's unfortunately myself is not on behalf of any investors. I do wish I have millions of dollars fund to invest, but that's not the case. However, I can probably just think about a few venues they can think about when getting funding in Africa. So from the local perspective, there could be some like local angel investors, for example, as given in both Nick and Martin's presentation. So these you can actually navigate through the local community and go to networking events and like pitch your ideas and see if anyone from the local community are willing to fund your initial startup ideas. Then the other very new kind of innovative way of getting money is crowdsource funding. So this is also something to explore. On the other hand, for overseas investors, I think there are definitely, I know there are some Chinese investment in Africa currently, but mostly in the public infrastructure space. But if you potentially explore that venue, they can have some new initiative in technology startups as well. And I think on overseas investment, government can play an important role in attracting overseas investors. Take the example of Singapore. The government actually provide matching funds for overseas investors who are willing to come over into Singapore to support local startups. So the overseas investment can be like, they can be one-to-one or joint venture, or even more than one-to-one ratio of investment. So I think that's something that the local government can do, play a role in attracting overseas investors.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So two tips. One is we need to encourage our local philanthropists, so to say, to support science. And if you're in here in our meeting and you're a philanthropist, so please get in touch with us and then we'll link you up. There's so much interest. Young people want to start businesses in bioentrepreneurship, and they also want to use biology. They want to use genome editing to grow our economies. So please, if you are there, get in touch with us and we'll be able to link you up. So this is the beauty of this platform, that we can be able to give, connect between those who have the technology and those who don't have the technology, those who have resources to invest, especially at the local level, and those who would like to really move the process forward. So there's still hands up, so I'll be calling on a few hands, but just before I call on the people who have raised their hands, there is one, sorry, there's one question here, which is so important, from Ishaki Muhammad. He says, let us not underestimate the importance of every species before business. What are the objectives of this business? Who benefits and who will lose? So this is more about how the benefits are shared among the developer and the community, and those who are responsible of conserving our biodiversity. Would I ask Martin to respond to that?
So, sorry, Margaret, I was trying to respond by writing a comment. Which was the question?
Oh, the question was about somebody here is more of a comment, but asking, what are the objectives of this bioentrepreneurship using genome editing? Who benefits and who loses? Do we have losers? Do we have beneficiaries?
Well, in here we are obtaining new breeds or new varieties. So that's something that people has been doing over centuries. You have seed companies, animal breeders, so people has been obtaining, and of course you have human health application. So people has been doing this kind of improvement for many years. You have the companies doing this, and it's the same. If you ask who benefits, it's the same kind of benefit. So when you have a new variety for agriculture, of course the company that sells the seeds benefits, but also the farmer using the seed, and then depending on the trade, perhaps the consumer, because it's more healthy or because the food is cheaper, and therefore you get the same kind of benefits, the benefits that you can acquire when you have a novel trait in a crop or in an animal of agricultural use. But the difference now is we can get these traits more precisely and with a higher speed compared to traditional breeding.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like now to ask Godfrey to allow Asta Gupta. Are you still there? If you can ask your question, please unmute Gupta.
All right, thank you, Margaret. Gupta, if you can hear me, unmute yourself and ask a question.
Gupta, you can unmute yourself. Look at the mic.
Hello.
Yes, Gupta, go ahead.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'd like to know how can I be funded if I want to start up my project on organic farming or biofertilizers. I'm in India.
Okay, so you're asking about how to start your company?
Yes,
making
yes,
organic.
Organic farming or biofertilizers. I'm a biotechnologist with experience in plant technology.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let's have another question by Dr. Sonia Vashne. Dr. Sonia, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I would like to know how can I have a company startup in the area of this biofertilizers.
Okay, thank you. So it's the area of biofertilizers. We have another hand, Olivia Dayu. Olivia?
Yes, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but be a bit louder.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you very much for organizing this webinar. My question goes to Nick. I'm Olivier Dayu. I'm from Benin Republic in West Africa and currently doing my PhD in China in the field of biotech. Yeah, so in the context of Africa, what could you advise to young people like me who are undertaking training in biotech with the goal of establishing an industry similar to Kudu Biotech? Please consider the scarcity of resources in Africa, like lab equipment supply or reagents.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. In fact, that question ties with one here, which was what are the indicating cost implications for early startup and potential challenges to be considered. So, Nick, you are the best person to respond to that. Finally, we'll have one more question. I have a question, two hands. Oh yes, I have one of our own regulator, Lillian Chimpepo from Malawi. Dr. Lillian, please ask your question.
Thank you,
Lillian,
Margaret.
you can unmute.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for organizing this webinar. It's an eye-opener that we have some companies and the entrepreneurship promising for genome editing. My question goes to Nick. having a company which you said Kudu Biotech. I just want to find out if you did some public consultations and how was your experience before, because before you develop, you come up with a business, you need to know whether people will be able to buy your products. So I want to find out your experience in when you were doing the consultation before you started your company.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have these questions, and as we respond, please also panelists give us your final remark, because we are now getting almost to the end of our session. So we'll start with Nick because it's very fresh.
Public consultation isn't so important because remember, the customer with biotech is not the public, it's the facility to which you sell the product. So in agriculture, that's farmers and pack houses and fruit processors. They want to have the product, but according to South African law, we don't have to market. We don't know yet, but it looks like we're not going to have to market fruit or vegetables that are produced with gene editing as having a label on them. So the only people who are concerned about that are the buyers, which are the customers, and the agricultural houses are very keen on the idea. The public participation is, I'm afraid, at that stage irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to give your final remark? Because I'll not come back to you, Nick. So there is the question of the young biotechnologist from Benin who is starting a business. Maybe that can be a bilateral discussion, sure. But you can give a quick, yeah.
It's very difficult to establish your own facilities. So you'll find that coming up with a partnership with a university where you can do contract research there is probably the most effective way to start getting your product to market.
Okay, good. Partnerships. But again, you are free to connect with Nick as after the webinar. So Ning, Dr. Ning, I think there are still the questions about how do you do the incubation, how do you get to the market?
Yeah, I think that's a very big question to start with. How would you start a business on biofertilizers? Also, I don't have first-hand entrepreneurship experience, but just as a framework to think about starting your own business, maybe you start to formulate your business idea around your technology. So what's the current status of fertilizers, which type of traditional chemical fertilizers you are targeting to replace? What are the current problems with those? So then identify a market you want to start with, say India, and which kind of crop you want to start with. So just think about these aspects and formulate into a business plan. It can be helpful to get in touch with, if available, some local incubator space or accelerators that actually coach you through this process. And then once you have this initial business plan ready, you can go to contact investors, see if anyone in the agri-tech space is actually interested in your idea. So I think the general flow of how you're gonna start it. Yeah, that's just what I learned on the way as well.
Thank you so much, Ning. I think those are good tips. You need to formulate your idea, make sure that you are connecting with the technical experts, and then look at who else you can partner with. Martin?
Well, I was trying to think about the biofertilizer question too, but the thing is, with biofertilizers, you have nowadays you have a lot of organisms from the agriculture that in the environment, I mean, that could be used for agriculture as they are. We have a few examples of microorganisms of biofertilizers improved by genome editing. I have mentioned one in the previous seminar if you are interested. But I will recommend that if somebody is starting with a company and biofertilizer, they should begin with mastering a few microorganisms, the industrial production of a few microorganisms as they were isolated from nature, and perhaps later try to improve them by using genome editing, perhaps by knocking down some metabolic route that is not useful for their purpose in agriculture or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. There are quite a number of questions that are coming about the regulatory uncertainties, and I have Eric Okore from Ghana, who is also the Chief Biosafety Officer. So Eric, would you like to ask your question very quickly? I'm giving this as a special consideration because really the question I have here is how a negative perception about gene editing affect investors in providing funds for startups? So Eric, how will uncertainties in regulation and negative perception about gene editing affect investors in providing funds for startups? So you can handle that as we wind up. Eric.
Thank you, Margaret. I want to thank all the presenters. It's not a question. I just wanted to know if after this Zoom meeting, will it be possible to get a presentations and read further and digest and then see how best to move forward? Thank you.
Oh, sure, sure, of course. So Martin, then because there are these uncertainties in the regulatory space, would you like to make one comment, 30 seconds, and then I'll be inviting our facilitator, Godfrey, to put our next poll question as we also see the results of the first poll question.
I was just, that question was also presented by some anonymous participants, so I was typing it down at the very moment. The thing is, like any uncertainty in business, it will repel the interest of investors. So it's very important that governments work for having a very clear landscape for the regulation of these products. So in that case, even if the response is going to be not so positive for the entrepreneurs, governments should clarify the regulations about this and the process about this. So entrepreneurs and also potential investors know exactly what they are going to, what they need to spend and to invest in order to deregulate these products.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, that space needs to be cleared. So as Godfrey is putting up the results of the poll question, I have Professor Kumba Torre, who was our panelist. If you can be asking or making a comment as the poll results are displayed on the screen. Okay, I have not had Professor Torre, so we'll leave it. So that is how we fared in terms of, do you think there's enough support from public and private sector to encourage entrepreneurship in genome editing?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can
Margaret,
hear you.
do you hear me?
Yes, Prof, go ahead.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank all the panelists for the great presentation. And I want them to come up a little bit on the link between the entrepreneurship, the gene editing, and the intellectual property, mainly in our context. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. So just two quick housekeeping that the presentations will be available, and the recording is already running in our Facebook Live and also in our YouTube channel. Again, the issue of entrepreneurship and the linkages and intellectual property is another topic that we are considering. So we'll put that, but thank you so very much. We need to be very clear about that. So I want to ask Godfrey to put the next poll question, as I also invite our global coordinator, Dr. Maha, to give her final concluding remarks. So that is the poll question. It's already on the screen. So which aspect of genome editing would you like our future webinars to address? I'm already getting a number of ideas that are being suggested. The latest from Professor Kumba. So it's time for you to submit.
Yes, Margaret, I will close the poll in 20 seconds. All right, I'll be closing the poll in 10 seconds. which aspect of genome editing would you like our future webinars to address? All right, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for voting.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Maha, please close for us.
Thank you, Dr. Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. And I'm so happy to see this webinar series going in the right direction, and we are getting so many people participating online from the Facebook. And thank you. I'm taking this opportunity to thank our esteemed lineup of panelists, Dr. Martin Lema, who has been doing a great job since the first webinar we organized, and Dr. Ning Mao did a very great job giving the insight into what's happening in Asia, and of course, Dr. Nick Grantham. And my able team in ISAAA, they are working very diligently to putting this up. And we are working on this because gene editing is going to provide a big potential and promise. It has got a huge promise, especially in the light of the challenges that we are facing today, the global challenges, new pests, new diseases, climate change, and not only in agriculture, but also in medical, healthcare, and industrial biotechnology. We saw that in Dr. Ning's presentation. So, but just like you, everyone else there, we want it to be science-based. We want it to be safe. So we want to, we will be guided by science. ISAAA, as usual, will be guided by science. And we also want to have trust and transparency. This will be the two pillars ISAAA will hold on. And with that, introducing trust and transparency, myself and my team, we are very, very excited, and we are eagerly waiting to unveil the new direction ISAAA is going to take. Margaret is already smiling. We are all excited to serve the global community more for public good. And you will hear from us soon, and how we are going to do and what we are going to do. But then, of course, as usual, we will be guided by science, and we will work for all stakeholders, the consumers, the farmers, countries, south, north, collaboration. So this is what we're going to do, but more soon coming up. So thank you very much, and have a nice day. For those who the day is already ending, good night. And for others, have a nice weekend. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Before you pull out, please, let's have the results, Godfrey, and then we close. Thank you so very much. Godfrey, do you have the results of the poll?
All right. So which aspect of genome editing would you like our future webinars to address? 63% want to hear about current research and products. 35% want to know about biosafety. 23% want us to talk about startup financing. 20% want us to address communication and information sources, and 17% want us to address global regulatory landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So those and many others will form the basis of our future webinars. So if you're out there, we are calling out for partnerships. Be with us, and we'll be able to move forward together. Ola?
Hi. Before we close, we'd like to invite you to our next webinar, which is going to be July 15. It's going to be a very interesting interaction. Once again, it's going to be global once again. So be with us. See you then.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.